The grand marble hallway of the Khanna estate gleamed under the afternoon sun. Tall glass doors opened to a living room that looked more like the centerpiece of a palace than a home. Every detail, polished wood floors, silk curtains and hand-woven rugs imported from Turkey, whispered of wealth and status. And yet, for Diljeet Khanna, the self-made millionaire who owned this house, none of it mattered more than the two little boys who called him Papa. But success had come at a cost. Diljeet's wife had left years ago, unable to keep up with his relentless ambition and long hours. Since then, he had thrown himself into business, building his empire brick by brick. To the outside world he was powerful, respected, even feared. But inside his mansion, a different truth lingered. His children often went to bed without seeing their father. That Friday afternoon, though, something urged him to come home early. Maybe it was the silence in his office. Maybe it was the weight of loneliness pressing too heavily on his chest. Or maybe, just maybe, fate had decided it was time for him to see something he never expected. As his car pulled up the long driveway, Diljeet loosened his tie. For once, he wanted to be Papa and not Mr. Khanna. Briefcase in hand, he walked to the front door, pushed it open and froze. Inside, chaos, beautiful chaos, was unfolding. His maid, Naina, the young woman he had hired barely 6 months ago, was on all fours on the carpet, laughing as one of his sons rode on her back like a little jockey. The other son stood in front, holding a rope tied gently around her shoulders, giggling uncontrollably as if leading a horse. And Naina? She wasn't scolding them. She wasn't trying to stop the mischief. She was right there in it, laughing, smiling, her hair falling loose as she neighed like a horse to the children's delight. Diljeet's first instinct was shock. The words slipped from his mouth before he could stop himself. What the? His voice startled everyone. The rope dropped from his son's hand. The boy on Naina's back quickly slid off, and Naina herself sat back on her knees, her face turning crimson. She bowed her head, already muttering apologies. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, breathless from play. They were restless. I was just trying to keep them happy. For a long moment, Diljeet just stood there, frozen in the doorway. He had seen countless boardroom betrayals, corporate wars, and financial surprises. But nothing in his life had prepared him for this sight. His stern, disciplined household filled with laughter, and his maid at the center of it all. His elder son, Arav, tugged at his sleeve. Papa, Naina is the best horse ever. She plays with us when you're not here. Those words cut deeper than any business rival ever could. When you're not here. Diljeet looked at his boys, smiling, glowing, alive in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. And then his eyes fell on Naina. She looked terrified, as if she was about to lose her job for crossing some invisible line. But in that moment, Diljeet wasn't angry. In fact, something strange stirred inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Warmth. He cleared his throat, masking the emotions building in his chest. "Go wash up for dinner, boys," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "I'll talk to Naina." The children ran off, still giggling, leaving silence behind. Naina stood frozen, her hands clasped, waiting for the inevitable scolding. But instead of raising his voice, Diljeet simply walked over to the window, staring at the garden outside. Finally, he spoke. "Do they laugh like this every day?" His question caught her off guard. She hesitated, then nodded softly. "Yes, sir, they miss you. I just try to fill the silence." Her honesty struck him harder than he expected. For years, he had believed that providing wealth and security was enough, that his children would understand why their father was always away. But here was a simple maid, teaching him that love wasn't in money, it was in moments. He turned back toward her. And for the first time, instead of seeing her as the maid, he saw her as something else. Someone with light in her eyes. Someone who cared for his sons not because she was paid to, but because she wanted to. And in that fragile moment, Diljeet Khanna, the millionaire who had everything, realized he might have been missing the one thing that mattered most. The silence in the living room stretched long after the children had run off. Naina stood with her head bowed, clutching the hem of her apron nervously. She had been scolded before by wealthy employers, and she braced herself for the sting of harsh words, maybe even dismissal, but none came. Instead, Diljeet remained by the window, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. He seemed lost, as if fighting a battle inside himself. Finally, he turned. "Sit down, Naina." Her eyes widened. No employer had ever asked her to sit. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the velvet sofa as if it might swallow her whole. "Tell me," he began, his voice softer than she had ever heard. "Why do you do all this? The games, the laughter, the horse rides? Surely it isn't in your job description." Naina hesitated. Her instinct screamed to give a polite answer, something safe. But looking into his eyes, she saw not a strict master, but a weary father, who truly wanted to understand. "They're children, sir," she said finally. "Children need more than clean clothes and meals. They need joy. They need someone to listen, to play, to notice the small things. If I don't give them that, then what am I really doing here?" Her words hung in the air, simple yet powerful. Diljeet felt a lump form in his throat. He had spent years believing that his empire, the houses, the cars, the schools, the tutors, was enough. But here was this young maid, reminding him that laughter was worth more than luxury. He sank into the armchair opposite her, loosening his tie completely. "And you? You don't mind?" Naina gave a faint smile. "I lost my parents when I was 15, sir. My little brother. He was only 6. I raised him as best as I could, working odd jobs, making sure he laughed even when there was nothing to eat. I guess I never forgot how important those moments are." For a moment, Diljeet forgot that she worked for him. He saw instead a girl, with resilience in her soul and a heart stitched together with sacrifice. But before he could say anything, little footsteps thundered back into the room. His younger son, Kabir, came running with a toy dinosaur clutched in his hand. "Papa, play with us too!" Diljeet blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" "Yes." Kabir climbed onto his lap without hesitation. "Naina plays every day. You never do." The innocence in his voice pierced deeper than any accusation. For the first time, Diljeet felt the weight of all the evenings he had missed, all the bedtime stories he had never told. He glanced at Naina, who gave a small nod as if to say, "Go on. They're waiting for you." And so, awkwardly at first, Diljeet put down his briefcase, rolled up his sleeves, and joined his sons on the carpet. They laughed as he chased them around the room, pretended to be a monster, and even let Kabir climb onto his back, mirroring the very scene he had walked into earlier. For the first time in years, the mansion echoed not with silence, but with joy. Later that evening, after the children had finally collapsed into bed, Diljeet found himself in the kitchen. Naina was tidying up, her hair tied back, humming softly as she stacked plates. "You've done more for them in 6 months than I have in 6 years, he admitted quietly. She froze, surprised by the honesty in his tone. "That's not true." "Sir, they adore you. They talk about you all the time." "They talk about a man they wish I was," he corrected, his voice heavy. "Not the man I've been." Naina looked at him then, not as an employer, not as a millionaire, but as a man weighed down by regrets. "Maybe it's not too late," she said gently. "Children forgive easily. All they want is your time." Her words settled in, his heart like seeds waiting to bloom. For the first time in years, Diljeet lingered at home that night instead of retreating to his office. He sat by his sons' bedsides, watching them breathe in their sleep, realizing how much he had missed. And as he stood there in the dim glow of the nightlight, he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change. Not because of his wealth. Not because of his empire, but because of one maid named Naina, who had reminded him what it meant to truly live. For the first time in years, Diljeet's mansion felt alive. The boys laughed more, the dinners stretched longer, and sometimes, on rare but precious evenings, he found himself telling them bedtime stories while Naina listened quietly from the doorway, her face glowing with a pride that wasn't hers to claim, yet somehow belonged to her. But the world outside those walls was not blind. The Khanna family name carried weight, and so did gossip. Word spread quickly among Diljeet's high society circles that the reclusive millionaire was spending more time at home, and worse, he was seen walking through the park with his maid and children one Sunday afternoon. At first, it was only murmurs. Strange, isn't it? Diljeet Khanna, of all people, playing the doting father. But soon, the murmurs sharpened into whispers. With the maid by his side, what's he thinking? One evening, as Diljeet attended a business dinner, at an upscale club, the whispers turned into open mockery. A fellow businessman, glass of whiskey in hand, leaned closer with a smirk. I heard you found new company at home, Khanna. The maid, was it? What's her name? The table erupted in chuckles. Diljeet's jaw tightened. Her name is Naina, and she's done more for my sons than anyone else ever has. The laughter faltered, replaced by awkward silence. No one had expected him to defend her. But even as he stood tall outwardly, inside he battled with doubt. Was he risking his reputation? Was he exposing Naina and his children to unnecessary scrutiny? Meanwhile, Naina had her own struggles. The children clung to her more than ever. Arav often asked, "Will you always stay with us, Naina? You won't leave, right?" And though she smiled and said, "Of course I'll stay," her heart trembled. Because she knew how fragile her position truly was. One word from Diljeet, one whim, and she would be gone. One rainy afternoon, as she folded laundry in the quiet of the servants' quarters, she overheard two of the older staff whispering. "She's getting too close to the boys," one said. "And to the master," the other added with a scoff. "She forgets her place. He'll never see her as anything more than help." The words stung, though she pretended not to hear. She reminded herself that she was there to work, to provide for her brother back in their village, to survive. She couldn't afford dreams, especially not dangerous ones. But dreams have a way of blooming in silence. Every time she saw the way Diljeet's stern expression softened with his sons, every time he lingered in the kitchen to ask her about her day, every time his eyes held gratitude instead of command, her heart betrayed her. The turning point came one evening when the children staged a small play in the living room. With cardboard swords and blankets as capes, they declared themselves knights, and Naina their queen. "Papa, you be the king!" Arav shouted, dragging his father into the game. Diljeet chuckled and obliged, sitting beside Naina as the boys danced around them. For a brief, shining moment, it felt like a family, whole, unbroken, real. But then the front door opened, and a cold voice shattered the warmth. "Diljeet, what is the meaning of this?" It was his sister Simran, elegant and sharp-tongued, who had arrived unannounced. Her eyes swept over the scene, the maid seated beside her millionaire brother, the children crowning her with paper. Disapproval radiated from her like ice. "Naina, take the children upstairs," Diljeet said quietly. Naina obeyed, gathering the boys as their protests filled the room. She didn't look back, though her heart pounded with dread. As soon as they were gone, Simran crossed her arms. "Have you lost your mind? Playing house with the maid? What will people say? What people say has never built my empire, Diljeet replied calmly. Simran's eyes narrowed. And what about your children? Do you think society will be kind to them if rumors spread? Do you want them mocked for having a maid as a mother figure? The words struck deep, but Diljeet stood firm. They are already mocked for having a father who was never there. If Naina gives them happiness, then I don't care what the world thinks. But late that night, when the house was quiet, doubt crept back in. He sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, torn between two worlds. The one he had built with power, and the one Naina had reminded him he truly longed for. Upstairs, in her small room, Naina silently wept. Not for herself, but for the storm she feared was coming. Because storms don't ask if you're ready, they simply arrive. And this one was already gathering on the horizon. The storm Simran had warned about arrived faster than anyone expected. By the following week, tabloids carried sly headlines. Millionaire Khanna growing close to Maid? Business associates whispered. Board members raised eyebrows. Even the schoolmothers with their diamond bangles and designer handbags exchanged knowing looks when Naina arrived to pick up the boys. Naina felt the weight of every stare, every whisper. She told herself she didn't care, but the truth was, she did. Not for her own sake, but for the children. They deserved respect, not ridicule. One evening, as she tucked Arav and Kabir into bed, Arav whispered, "Naina, don't leave us. Promise." Her throat tightened. She smoothed his hair and forced a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." But in her heart, a decision was already forming, one that broke her more than anything else. The next morning, she packed her small suitcase. When Diljeet came down for breakfast, expecting to see her bustling in the kitchen, he found only silence. Then he saw her by the doorway, suitcase in hand. "What is this?" His voice was low, dangerous. "I'm leaving, sir." "No." The word shot out like an order. "You're not." Tears filled her eyes, but she held her ground. "Your children need peace. They don't deserve whispers and stares because of me. You'll find someone else, someone respectable, to care for them." He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "They don't want someone else. They want you. I want you." The confession hung between them like a lightning strike. Naina's breath caught. She had dreamed of hearing those words, but reality crushed her hope. "And what happens then, sir? A millionaire and a maid. Do you think society will ever accept it?" Society. He almost laughed bitterly. "Society didn't build my empire. I did. Society didn't raise my sons. You did. I won't let them, or you, be dictated by whispers." Her tears spilled over. I can't let them suffer because of me." But before she could step away, a small voice interrupted. "Papa, why is Naina crying?" It was Kabir, standing at the staircase in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Behind him, Arav appeared too, wide awake. Diljeet froze. Naina quickly wiped her tears, but Arav's gaze darted between them, sensing the truth. "Are you sending her away?" Arav's voice trembled. "Don't do that, Papa. She's our family." Kabir's lip quivered as he clung to Naina's leg. "Please don't let her go." The room fell silent. In that silence, something shifted inside Diljeet. He realized this wasn't about him or about society. It was about two little boys who had already lost too much, and a woman who had given them back their laughter. He squared his shoulders. "No one is sending her away." Naina shook her head, but he raised his hand firmly. "Enough. I've lived my whole life chasing what the world thought mattered. Money, power, status. But none of it kept my children warm at night. None of it put smiles on their faces. You did, Naina. You gave them back their childhood, and you gave me back my heart." Naina's breath hitched. Diljeet turned to his sons, kneeling so he was eye level with them. "Do you want Naina to stay?" "Yes," they both shouted without hesitation. He looked back at her, his voice steady. "Then she stays. Not as a maid, as part of this family." The weeks that followed were not easy. There were more whispers, more raised eyebrows, more judgmental glances. But Diljeet didn't flinch. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about appearances. He took his sons and Naina to parks, to dinners, even to charity events. And every time someone tried to sneer, he held her hand tighter, daring them to say a word. Simran visited again, still skeptical. "You're risking everything for her," she warned. "No," he corrected gently. "For them. For us." And, slowly, even Simran couldn't deny the change in the household, the lightness in the children, the warmth in her brother's eyes. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Diljeet stood in the garden watching Naina chase Kabir while Arav laughed from the swing. She looked radiant in her simplicity, her laughter carrying through the air. He stepped forward, his heart steady, and when she finally turned, breathless and smiling, he said the words he had kept inside for too long. "Naina, will you stay?" "With us? Not as a maid, not even as a caretaker, but as the mother of my sons, and as my wife." Her eyes widened, filling with tears she could no longer hold back. You mean that?" "With everything I am," he said, his voice thick. "You changed everything, Naina. You gave me back my family. Let me give you one too." The children, catching on, shouted with glee. "Say yes, Naina. Say yes." Through her tears, she laughed and nodded. Yes. That night, the Khanna mansion was no longer just a house of wealth. It was a home of love. And as Diljeet tucked his sons into bed with Naina by his side, he whispered a silent promise to himself. "Never again will I trade moments for money. Never again will I let love slip through my fingers. Because sometimes, the greatest fortune a man can find is not in gold or glory, but in the laughter of his children, and in the love of the one who gave them back their smiles."